So today we're going to have today we have what I call an eye-opening podcast because we're going to dive deep into something called emotional energy transference, and we're going to talk about how that happens in marriages, and we're going to explore the dynamics of how wives sometimes may unintentionally drain the husbands, our energy, not simply by not taking 100% responsibility for their emotions. Today is not a day about making women wrong. It's really a day about about us as men looking and seeing how we participate. And I'll share with you a story in just a second. So hang in. Cool. Hey, so this last week, actually something's been happening to me over the last couple weeks. But before I tell that story, let me bring on my co-host, Dr. Stephen Frew. I'll tell you a little bit about this awesome guy, my co-host. So Stephen Frew has a very strong background in divinity studies and clinical psychology. So the guy is like knows his stuff, but he's got a lot of experiences. I think the reason he's got so much experience is he's got a whole bunch of kids and he's got a whole bunch of grandchildren too. So Stephen is a personal business coach. He works with men and women who are working to find traction in their lives in this crazy complex world that we live in. And Stephen, how are you doing, my man?
I'm doing really well. I just come off having 10 days with my youngest daughter, who's 25, who lives in New York State and is a shepherdess. She was just here for 10 days. So I worked hard to fill up my cup of loving her and her loving me. And we just had a wonderful time together. She's an amazing young woman.
That's so fabulous. That's terrific. You're so blessed. So I want to share with you a story, something that's happened to me in the last couple weeks, and then we were going to talk about something different today, but because of this and really something that happened just about an hour ago with me, I said, I think this would be a really, really great topic for us to talk about, and it's called emotional transference and how it impacts relationships. So a few weeks ago, I got a call from my former wife, and we're dealing with some some of our finances that we have, some of our investments that we have. And, we have chosen to keep those investments in place even after our divorce. And so, she was asking me some questions about those investments, doctor. And then it was really interesting because for years, like we were married 21 years, and Stephen, for 21 years, she was so good at managing finances, managing the money, managing how checks go out, how checks come in. She's like spectacular. And for some reason, in this last call, like I said, about a week ago, she's calling me and saying, like, I don't know, what if this check doesn't get cashed, and all this stuff, like all this drama and all this upset that she's got going on, And so I'm doing my best to address it. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just like listening to her, and I'm listening to her. And what I realized is that in listening to her, I was starting to experience the old relationship that I had with her. And I'm not a person that experiences a lot of anxiety. Like I just don't. I deal with the anxiety pretty well. And all of a sudden, I just felt like this tremendous amount of anxiety. And then we got really close to resolving one of that issue, right? And all of a sudden, before that issue was resolved, before she even acknowledged that issue being resolved, she all of a sudden had another issue that needed to be addressed. And I was like, oh my God, this is what it was. This is like what happened when I was married. And the crazy thing that I don't know if this happens to you, Dr. Frew, is whenever I go through something in my marriage and I'll talk to my coaching clients or I'll just talk to men in general, it's almost like everybody's going through the same thing at the same time. Do you ever have that experience?
Well, yeah.
Isn't it crazy? So some of my coaching clients were like, yeah, I had a conversation with my wife, and and I felt really this and I felt really that. And it was kind of like the same conversation. It was vibing with all of us. So then just a few minutes ago, about an hour and a half ago, she got a letter in the mail, and it was about the transfer that we made. We moved some money around. And so she called me to share with me about the transfer, like, oh, everything was good. Everything was good. And then in that conversation, she started to give me like some like bad news about it. And it was not even bad news. It was just like she was making up like something that was going on. And I want to be more respectful like that. She's making it up. But she was going through something, right? And then what I was wondering in that conversation was like, I'm not married to her anymore. Like, what responsibility do I have in this conversation that's going? Like, what is my responsibility as a former spouse to go through this? Where for me, when I look back on my life, this is part of how I lost myself in the marriage because of this energetic transference, and I'm sure I did it to her. So I'm not a saint. Don't get me wrong. I don't think I'm perfect. I remember like this is what it was like, and then I felt like it was almost like I was experiencing like PTSD. It was interesting. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I immediately got on the phone with a good friend of mine. He's like, dude, I'm going through the exact same thing. So this is an issue. This is something that us men face. Like where does responsibility end and where did it start?
Well, I think it's a real issue. I don't know if I'd call it energy transference. I would look at it. I've written a book called "Marginal to Magnificent: How to Make Your Marriage Sing." And the model we created for couples was that there were three different domains within a marriage. There was the domain of your own inner work. They call that a domain. What you're doing when you get married in the first place. Who am I? All
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. And the second domain was roommates. How do we get along together? If any one of your listeners, our listeners, or you or me, if we rented a house together, there'd be a bunch of roommate issues. And
Yes.
that would really involve money, space, the use of space, and time. Those are the three. And the third one is deep friendship or the need to connect intimately with each other. That's a whole different conversation, how we connect. Now, in a divorce, you have intentionally given up the third one. You said, I am no longer available to connect intimately, not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally and everything else. You pretty much, most divorces cut that off. I've known a couple couples who keep that connection, but mostly it cuts it off. And so
Yeah.
we're not dealing with that. So we're dealing with the inner world and we're dealing with the world of roommates. The world of roommates doesn't go away because you divorce. It goes away because you're not living together, but you're saying we're sharing money and you're sharing, and people are sharing children and money. You're
Yeah.
sharing a lot of practical things. So then the first thing to say is, I think, does does the man have freedom to be emotionally who he is in his own primary family, with his own mother, with his own father, with his own sister, his own brother, with his own the people in his life? Does he have freedom? And if he doesn't, that's his work, because he's going to see something as being too close to her, maybe, or too involved with her emotional content. He's not going to know how to have his own Lebensraum, German word for living space. He's not going to know how to have his own elbow room in the relationship. He's going to be either focused on warding her off, or correcting her, or pleasing her. Well, all of those would be in some way real, depending on what the divorce was about, depending on what the money is about, and what the children are about. So I think what you're bringing up is a perfectly aimed at divorced couples, both the men and the women, about finding their own individuality and at the same time wanting to maintain or even to expand their ability to communicate with each other. That
Yeah.
takes some pretty good work. That's a lot of the work that goes on in my office. It doesn't go on just because of divorce. It goes on because I have a young man who just moved out of his house at 29 years old. And his mother is very upset with him for moving out. She said he could have stayed and saved money. And it was a big deal for him to say, I'm moving out. And it doesn't have to do with you, mother. It has to do with me and where I'm going and what I'm doing. So I don't know. That's kind of introductory. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that. You got me reading this book. I got, Iron John,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
good.
just, it's like, it's what we're talking about here. A lot of that is that, we're talking about the gentleman you're talking about is the key is under the pillow. That's
Yeah,
that's the
that's
whole
right.
thing right there,
Right,
and
right.
it's like, I am absolutely on an amazing journey, and I'm happy to share it with people, and I'm grateful to do that with you. You're kind of like my Iron John over here. Reach
Mm.
out to you, and but it's a really interesting thing, because it it could sound like I'm complaining. It could sound like because I'm not, and I'm not complaining about how she communicates. Um, and it's going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I have a complaint about that, like, oh, but I'm not here complaining. I'm here communicating. Like, I want to share something, because it seems to be a dynamic that's important and worth exploring. So I want to
Well,
explore the dynamic.
you want to get clear. I mean, that would be legit to get
Yeah,
clear because she's somebody so special in your life and you're not cutting off. It's not like she's deceased or you're deceased. You're by definition continuing using the money thing. You're sharing a lot of life through the money. Money is a
yeah,
very pregnant way to share with another person. And because it's pregnant with all kinds of symbolism, how boundaries and cheapness, generosity, order, all of those things are involved in the discussion about money. So when if I'm talking to I'm not, but if I were talking to my ex about money, I would have to enter that conversation with some degree of caution, not because of protecting myself against her, but because I want to be really clear with myself that I'm consciously staying with what she's talking about and I'm not reverting back to old issues or fearfully projecting onto future issues. If I
totally,
don't do that,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. If I
yeah,
don't do
I could
that,
see that. Yeah, keep going. I'm sorry.
that's okay. If I don't do that, I'm going to be reacting to her, or I'm going to be trying to control her or teach her or something that isn't natural and true to our relationship.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
for me, it would be more like if I'm going to get on the phone with my ex-wife, I'd say, let's say Martine and I have just decided to each invest $50,000 in a new restaurant. Let's say we did that. Now, if Martine and I were talking today about what the status of that restaurant is, have we found property yet, or have we come up with a name or whatever, he would be as diligent about himself as I would be about myself. What we would be accountable. We
Yeah,
would be specific, but we wouldn't be, I don't think, we wouldn't be saying, am I sure I can trust you? Because if we were saying that, we'd never put the 50,000 in the first place.
yeah, we'd
We
be
would
dumb
have
for doing that.
already,
Yeah,
yeah. So then we'd say, well, okay, tell me what things you're doing, Martine. I tell you what you're doing, Stephen. And then we would have a discussion that had nice, clean boundaries and some vision and some agreement to it that made but sense when we hung up the phone. We both know where we were.
yeah, but
Now the
that's,
room,
and I get that. So let me interrupt you
yeah,
real quick. But that's what you're talking about is a. It's gonna sound funny. What you're talking about is a healthy relationship that has rules, and the
that's
thing is
roommates.
that right, that has rules. Like, and I find that most relationships, like literally most relationships, I say the overwhelming majority of relationships have no rules that have been designed as rules. They're I see that they're and I'm throwing this out as a generality, but I think I'm right. And I'm happy to be wrong about this. That we've made agreements, we've made undeclared agreements with each other. You can talk to me this way, and I'm going to talk to you that way. And when you say this to me, I'm gonna retaliate like this. We never said it was okay. We just over time did that, and then that became a habit and a pattern in the way that we are, like how we are in a relationship is that my wife says really mean things to me, and what I do is I go tell her to fuck off, like something like that, like that, and or I ignore her, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. But we didn't make these agreements. We didn't say when we got married, hey, like after 4 years, I'm gonna ignore you. After 5 years, I'm gonna talk to you in a foul way. After 10 years, I'm not even gonna sleep in the same room with you. Like we didn't make these agreements. We found ourselves in these agreements because we didn't have an agreement and we didn't have a process to manage ourselves. No, ourselves, me, Mr. Martin, the Mr. John or whoever, didn't have a process to manage himself in an emotional, intelligent way, nor did he have the capacity or the courage or whatever that little thing is that we need in order to communicate that to our spouse. This is, I like to change the rules here.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. That's what we need, but what we have is this other thing.
A friend of mine used to say, a therapist friend of mine used to say, a good divorce is as difficult to bring off as a good marriage. And I agree with him because we have no prenup when it comes to what you're talking about, emotion
Yeah.
and psychological and spiritual dimensions. We have no prenup there. We don't really, even premarital counseling is usually very shallow and very, very shallow. I don't know what else
Yeah.
to say. I have said to couples, I have a couple right now in their 60s that have been in what we would call in the profession premarital counseling. I've been seeing them for about a year and a half, and they're both saying, "Wow, we have a lot of work to do before we decide that we want to go to this next place with each other." I think what you're talking about is that we haven't sat down and seriously looked at what this should look like. And then we don't, when we divorce, the work that you do in breakthrough, I think you should do that work with couples who are premarital.
Absolutely. That's definitely the direction. Thank you. That's definitely the
Yeah.
direction. That I had been in real estate since 1985. I got my real estate license July 5th of 1985. I was 20 years old. And my experience is because I have friends that I've been with forever, like I've sold them property, and that was, almost 40 years ago, and they still know them, and I've done other, and I had a friend that told me that him and his wife spoke more about the alignment separate from their children, um, in buying and selling real estate than they ever did talk about their own personal relationship. Like,
Yes.
like, like,
Yeah.
not that they didn't talk about the relationship because they did talk about it, but mostly how they talk about it is what you're doing wrong and what I'm doing right. Like that's the conversation. It's a
I
judgmental, I call it judging, blaming, or complaining. I'm
yeah.
judging you, I'm blaming you for something, or complaining about you. And like, but that's a conversation. It's just not very, not a very powerful one, right?
Well, after my second divorce, I lived with a very good friend in Malibu for 5 years. He had a beautiful big house in Malibu. He runs restaurants. And we used to joke, and that was before this marriage, and this marriage is 34 years and it feels like it's pretty solid. But when
Congratulations.
Randy and I lived together, we would say this is the best marriage either one of us has ever had because we talked about all this stuff without the drama. You'd say, hey, I'm buying lunch, not you. You bought lunch 3 times. I want to buy lunch. Well, I can afford it. Whatever. Who cares? We talked about it. Whatever it was, who cleans up the dishes, where the dirty laundry goes, stuff, all the kind of the nuts and bolts of daily living, which we never did what you're talking about. We never prenupped it, but it was just because we were both guys that we were comfortable doing it with each other.
Yeah.
But when you mix in the parent dimension, you mix in the mother dimension, the woman as mother, and you as son. Where's that fit here? And am I clean with my mother? Am I out of that kind of immersion with my mother? Do I know where I am about my mother? Do I know where I am as a son? And if I know where I am as a son, can I speak the truth to my ex-wife in a way that honors a couple basics? One, that I want to be honest with her and clear. Two, that I don't want to be judgmental in any way, shape, or form. Three, that I don't want to be perfect or match all my inner ideals that I have when I get on the phone and she's triggering that. I don't want to react to that. I don't want to buy into that. So I want to be sure that I'm clean in that conversation. That means quite often that that conversation should be shorter, not longer,
Yeah.
because the longer you're in the presence of the what was a very intense piece of your life, that relationship, the longer you're susceptible to being seduced into your old images and your old ways of operating with each other. And just
Yes.
because she's clean and you're clean doesn't mean you can't get seduced there. Every one of us can get seduced. After all, it was a marriage, and children came, and money came, and emotion came. There was a lot going on. You just don't flip that switch and move beyond it.
Absolutely. So, okay. So then that has me look at a dynamic that I discovered once I separated, and I have it as kind of a hierarchy. And I wrote it here. It's right here on my on my my monitor, my other monitor, and you can see it right here. I mean, it's faded. It's been there for a long time. And the idea at the top was to flourish. That was the goal. The goal was to flourish, to live a life that flourish in all the different aspects of that word. So, and I realized that immediately once I did that, once I decided that that's what I wanted, and I had a need, I had a desire, that what happened almost immediately is I questioned myself. Like I had an idea, something I want to do, and then I questioned myself. And then my questioning myself caused me to consider my confidence. It was like now the thing I'm dealing with, the dynamic I'm dealing with is the confidence. And then once I started dealing with confidence, the next lower layer was doubt. And then below that was, then I would stress out, and like that would now cause stress, that would cause confusion, and then I experienced fear, sadness, and then I found myself depressed. But how I came up with this is that when I moved out, I saw that I was depressed. Like I was depressed, and I had been depressed for some time. And when I worked through that depression, I then experienced this tremendous amount of fear. And I'm not a fearful guy. I'm not the guy that has like I'm afraid of stuff. But I was married to somebody. I was married to somebody that was afraid of a lot of stuff, like a lot of stuff, like everything, like not everything, but a lot of stuff. And so I think about like that emotional transference, like that. So what I did is I worked to figure out what was my fear in this moment. Like what fear am I experiencing in this moment that to me is going to lead to sadness? Like what's that? And then I started to work through it. Like, yeah, well, I'm not really afraid of that. I'm not really afraid of that. Really, oh, she's afraid of that. She's afraid. And somehow I took on her fears. I took on what she was afraid of. And that's what I'm talking about with this emotional transference. So that when she gets mad, when she got mad, when she was afraid of something as a child, and this is what I'm thinking about. What triggered this is what you talked about. The child is now the son. Is I think about when I was a kid, that if my parents had an issue, I think maybe I can feel the issue for them so they don't have to feel the issue.
Something like that. Yes.
Yeah. And
Something that
then
the child's loyalty. Yes.
so this and then the next step from that was where I was wondering if that became a way of operating, a way of being, and that's how I responded to women. And then if I got married, then all of a sudden my wife would take on the mom role to some degree. And then I would then want to do that, take away her pain or her fear by experiencing fear. So
Well,
I'm gonna leave that wide open for you to play with.
you're saying you were both depressed in the marriage?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not saying she was. I'm saying that I
Oh, you're
was. I
saying
don't.
you were, but
Yeah.
she, see, there's a book by Bruce Derman, psychologist, old crank of a guy who I love. He wrote the book, We'd Have a Great Relationship If It Weren't for You. And that's a good book to own for your
Yeah.
listeners. And put it on your coffee table. You don't even have to read it. Just read the title every day. because it reminds you of your own work rather than your partner's work. So
100%.
in that book, he says you're more alike than you're not alike. He says that what you see in your partner is already in you. And if you're going to work, then you're going to look at what you see in your partner and use it as your own stuff. Not everything, but a
Hmm.
lot of stuff. And then if you go there and then you're starting to get off your high horse and you're starting to say, wow, I got stuff here to deal with. I got stuff. Well, I look, first of all, if I hear the word depression, I think sorrow
Yeah.
or I think anger. So if I hear the word depression, I say, where was your sorrow? And where was your anger? And then how did that obscure your communication with your partner? And
Yeah.
then if you bring money into that, you say money will symbolize the where the communication breaks down, what you fight about with money, what you dream about with money, how you spend your spending patterns with money. All of those are like Rorschach tests on where you are emotionally with each other. If everybody knows what a Rorschach test, if you don't, look it up. RORSHACH, Rorschach test. It is a way of trying to get where a person is when they don't know where they are. It kind of reveals that. So that the
Mm.
money is a Rorschach test quite often. And for you in that conversation, I would suggest it was a Rorschach test.
Yeah. So it reveals like
Yes.
it's the context that reveals like what's below.
Yeah.
And that was interesting because it was, I would have said, now I have zero emotion around this relationship. I'm complete with it. I'm all done. We're divorced. It's final. We have things like we own a house together as well. Still, she lives in like this, and I'm okay with the stuff that we have and how the finances are like that. I'm good with that. Um,
But let
and
me
then
interrupt you. Why
yeah,
would you say there's no emotion? Of course there's emotion.
well, I
The
mean, yeah, go
emotion
ahead.
doesn't stop because you divorced her.
What I mean by no emotion is like it doesn't weigh on me like it used to weigh on me. And
Oh,
so in what you just challenged me on is that's what it is. I'm saying is it doesn't weigh on me like it used to weigh on me. There's not it You're
okay.
right. It's
Yes.
not no emotion. It's simply that doesn't weigh on me like it used to weigh on me.
Yes. Okay.
That's like the truth, right? There's the truth
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for distinguishing that. So now that I look at that, of course I go, oh well, there's other stuff to work through, and I'm one of those guys that like stuff to work through. I'm just prefer other stuff to work through, but you get what you get. You don't throw a fit.
Yeah.
Life is going to give you what it gives you, and a lot of times where I'm talking to the guys I'm working with is that they'll say that they're like, this isn't the issue I wanted to work on.
Right.
you know,
Right.
he might be
Right.
talking about their business or something, and all of a sudden, where the issue is really their ex-wife. It's something like, wow, that's not the one I want to work on. But then you work through that, and all of a sudden, their issue at work is now resolved. And you're like, how does that like, they always like, how does that come together? Like, I don't know how it comes together. It's just connected, and when you deal with it, then you're disconnecting the bonds. You're untying something that's connected.
Yeah.
There's something there that's connected, and you don't necessarily always have to dig it out. Sometimes it's just distinguishing. Oh, that's something that happened with my mom or something. Oh, okay, I can see
A
that. All right,
couple
I can
years
operate differently.
ago, a couple of years ago, we were funking along, my wife and I, and things were kind of flatlined a little bit. And we were also complaining about money to each other. We weren't attacking each other. We we're complaining about it. We're not really spectacular money managers, either of us. We're human resource people. She's a therapist and I'm a coach and therapy background, all that. So we were talking about it one day, and I suggested, let's meet every Friday at 3 o'clock. I knew she had that open for 1 hour in which we do nothing but talk about money. We'll set the
Mm,
timer. When the hour's done, we're done. Can you agree to that? So she said, sure. So we started. She's very open and willing to look at stuff.
yeah,
So we started the hour. And what we did originally is say, here's all the stuff I've spent money on this week. And she would say, here's all the stuff I spent. Well, one of the things that was a trigger was she bought one of the grandchildren. We have many, many children and many, many grandchildren. She bought one of the children, I think, a $200 or $300 birthday gift, and I was shocked because we're not in that category. Then we can't. We have 22 grandchildren, and I said to her, "Do we spend $300 on the other 21?" Well, you do the math, you know. So I spent at that time maybe $150 a month on cigars, and so I brought to the table. Uh, Gee, by the way, I spent 150 bucks on cigars. So I was embarrassed to say that. I was sort of doing that on the sly. I wouldn't tell her I'd order the cigars. I'd look for them when they came and sneak them in the house. So I gave up most of this, about 95% of the cigar smoke. And I don't do that anymore. But what happened in those sessions is that as we got more transparent with each other on what we were spending on, we got to talk about that. And we actually, it was the most intimate hour of the week for quite a while,
Mm,
where what we were hiding or sliding on, we started to talk about without judgment. We started to say, wow, and yeah, I can see her if she were on the phone. She'd be happy to have a budget of $500 per grandchild for their birthday every year. She'd be happy for that if I could write
yeah,
that check.
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's who she is. She's big hearted. So I say, well, we can't do it. Oh, okay. Then what can we do? Well, then what can we do becomes a her and I question. And some of those grandchildren are mine, and some of those grandchildren are hers. More mine than hers. I have more children. So then we could talk about how we imagine it and how we want to give and what we want to give. So there's ways to get to the conversation that I think needs to happen, which is about your values and your limitations, your generosity and your fear. It's about that stuff. All money conversations are about
Mm,
that stuff. And if you could do that, you can see your love through. Because clearly, I would guess, I'd hypothesize that you love her, your ex-wife. I would hypothesize that she loves you, her ex-husband, that you love each other. But it's not the same kind of love that it initiated the marriage. It's metamorphosed into something quite different, and that hasn't been fully articulated. Because quite often what we do with divorce is we say, I don't love him anymore. Not true. The love is still there. You can't shut love off like an on off
no,
switch. So if the love is there, then you better kind of come get real with it. And then you
I
can
think it sure
see,
respects it.
well,
It sure
yeah,
certainly respects love. If you're not, if
yeah.
I can't respect love for my former spouse, how am I gonna respect love for my
Who
fiance?
who are you? Yeah, if
Yeah,
you can't do
yeah,
that.
yeah. I don't think you get to separate that. I have a woman that I'm coaching, and she's in a 6 year divorce.
Whoa.
6 years. I just started coaching her the other day. 6 year divorce. Husband has taken all the money, all that transferred stuff, blah blah blah. Did all this stuff right, and has a new wife and all that, and she was really upset about the relationship. Not as upset about the money, and I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like right under millions of dollars, right? And she's not upset about the money. She's like, I can go make money. I'm good at making money. I'm like, he can take all the money, he can take the house, whatever. I'll go get me another house. I'll go make me more money. It's not that. It's the way I'm being treated in this divorce, and the way that I feel about him and the relationship he's having with this other person. And
Right.
she gave me a long laundry list of, she's like on her sixth attorney and blah 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 and all this. To give me a long laundry list of all the stuff that's happened, and it really it was interesting to me to think that, like, how does this person, this man that she was married to, like, what's the outlook? What's the real outlook for his new relationship? How do you be completely terrible to somebody in your life that you say you love? How do you be a complete jerk to her and leaving her and doing all that and then expect that you're going to be different with this new person you're with? I don't see that happening. I just don't see that that's a way possibly live life. I don't see that outcome. I don't see the math on that one.
I say to women, often that I've coached, you want to do a more careful job of vetting this new spouse who wants to marry you because, of course, you're terrific. And of course, he's terrific. It's brand new. Of course, all this good stuff we kiss, we love, and all that. But vetting would mean tell me how your last marriage failed. And if he says, well, I'd say, stop right there. I'm not really interested in what she did or didn't do. I'm interested in what you know about your divorce. That is your responsibility, what you did. Because in my marriage today, I say I am 100% responsible for whatever's wrong in this marriage. That was shocking to me 5, 10 years ago. I shocked myself by saying that, but it was a door opening. Then I would say, when men would challenge me in that, I'd say, well, I expect her to say the same thing to herself about herself, that she's 100% responsible. So that we can talk intelligently. Our intelligent conversation doesn't include, here's what's wrong with you, Lynn. Our
Yeah.
intelligent conversation means I have some stuff I want to share and open, some fears. I have some different things, and I want to share those with you. And then she'll share with me, and we can kind of get it out over the table and look at what we're struggling with.
Yeah.
So in the second marriage, what happens is the partners don't vet the other person, vet from, corporate world,
Oh,
from
100%. I was
vetting
talking to
the,
somebody about
yeah,
that last night.
yeah,
I was talking to a
and
gentleman that I coach out in New York, exactly the same thing. And he's out dating. And I was suggesting to him that that his wanting to date this person, he was telling me that all the stuff that's happened with them, and his wanting to date this person and hold on to this person has more to do with him being lonely or being
yes,
alone
yes,
than it does have to
yes,
do with the quality of that relationship.
yes, sure. Well, we can all be there, can't we?
Oh, I could be there. I'm certainly not, you know, the way I coach is I'm looking at myself as well. I'm using myself as I'm looking at the way that I do things and how I could do things better. And it just seems that oftentimes the people that I work with are dealing with the same issues. Just seems to
Of
be
course
that
they are.
it's kind
Sure,
of the way it
sure,
works out, And there's really only
sure.
so many issues, right? And so to use myself and in a level of vulnerability and a little level of honesty and humility, and then have that conversation versus a conversation where you get from with your buddies when you're like, well, I don't do that, and the pointing the fingers and the making other people wrong. It's like that has its place. I don't know what the value is, but it has its place in certain groups. I just don't think it's a very valuable place. And
Well,
I think, go ahead.
Jung talked about going what your job is, like the acorn becoming the oak tree. Jung talked about your individuality. He called it individuation. And the only basis for true intimacy is two individuating individuals on their own path, discovering who they are, what they're about, what their deep values are, what their fears are, all of the factors going into being a functioning grown up are involved in being in individuation. So if
Yeah,
you look at that, then you say your job is to create a context within yourself for your own individuation, which means letting stuff go that you need to let go. In AA, they say make amends, take a look, deal with it, leave it in the past. It's in the past, but deal with it and then leave it and so forth. And then when you start doing that, then you start automatically opening up the conversation around shared vision, which we should do one of these podcasts about one of these times, because shared vision then will show up very powerfully when someone is doing what you're doing. Is you still have money that you're sharing in your ex relationship, and you need to have a lot of conversation about how that money is doing and what you're doing with it. And you need to have the experience of separating that from your intimate domain 3 conversation. It's a
which was
roommate
the deep
conversation.
friendship conversation. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So who am I? How do we get along? And a need to connect, which is
What are my
own inner work.
values?
Yeah. You said
Yeah.
own your inner work, who I am,
Yes.
and then roommates are have more to do with like how we get along, like how we
Money,
function.
space, and time. Money, space, and
Money, space,
time.
and time. And then the last one, which is you call deep friendship, which I would probably call something else, but that's a great way to distinguish it, which is our human need to connect. How do we connect as human beings?
Yes.
At what level?
Yes.
Like how far are we going to go with that connection? How much intimacy will we have? How do we
Yeah.
expand that intimacy? One thing you talked about, I remember, was affection, and that's a word that I really, really love. It's one of my words for 2024, which is something that I didn't realize that I was missing. It was intimacy, but it was more affection. It was more the affect
Yes.
like that. And,
Yes.
and, and that's just, that's just a lot of different ways to unpack that one. So real cool, man. So you're saying, don't call it emotional transference. You're calling it something else. The truth of the matter is, I'll tell people, like, call it whatever you want it. If you're working on it, label it
Yeah.
however you want it, because
Right.
whatever label you want to put on it that empowers you, that gives you the power as a man or woman to look at it at we use the word issues, look at how your life is unfolding. Are you getting what you want out of life? Are you experiencing what you want to experience in life? Do you even know the emotions that you even want to experience? And I think that there's a whole thing, because most people, I find, are experiencing emotions that they don't want to experience and can easily talk about, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to feel that way. But when you ask people, well, how do you want to feel? They're it because then they're going to be less specific, and that's going to be more of platitudes. I just want to feel happy. It's like, but what? Do you want to be
Yeah.
excited in your marriage? Do you want to be turned on?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you want to be turned on in your life? Like, what is it you want? Like, what emotions, and how do you want to
We've
experience your life?
learned we've learned to dumb it down. Psychotherapy hasn't helped there. Psychotherapy talks about issues all the time. And issues are fine, but there's also a pathway. There's also the pathway of individuation. There's your spiritual pathway.
I
There's your
love that word.
psychological pathway. We're meant to keep growing and developing and discovering. We're meant not to stop. So divorce is a bus stop. It's not the end. And a career change is a bus stop, or birth of a child, or the death of a child, or the change of this or that. These are bus stops along the path, but the path is there. And our job is to keep reconnecting with it. And that's who am I? There's a good little TED talk. It's called Know Your Why by
Mhm.
Simon Sinek, Sinek. It'll take you half an hour to listen to it, but it's well worth listening to in light of this conversation, because your why will have a lot to do with how you're relating to your money,
Mm,
believe it or not.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And remember, we're talking about money, but money is simply the context. It could be
Yeah.
sex,
Yes.
it could be
Yes.
anything, it could
Yes.
be all kinds of
Yes.
things. So whatever
Yes.
your issue is, whatever your challenge is, whatever that thing that you face, guys, we call it money today, but throw your thing in there. It could be health, it could be anything. So
Yes.
throw your thing in there, and then listen to this podcast through those through through that through that context. And
Yeah.
as always, Dr. Frew, I just love unwrapping life with you.
I love it too. I love it too. And you could say, see, we have a relationship, Martina and I. It's not intimate in the usual sense of that word, but it is affectionate. It is respectful. You can think of it that way. It is curious. He's curious about me. I'm curious about him. I respect his work and I respect him as a man. He respects me. So if you look at that when you're looking at an ex spouse or even a current person you're partnering with, that's called roommates. We're good roommates.
Yeah.
We're not sharing a whole lot of our inner work. We're sharing a little bit, and we're not striving to become deep BFF, best friends forever. We're not doing that. But there is, if you watch this podcast, a comfortability between us. And it's not a bad model for what you're doing with your ex. It wants to feel like this
Yeah.
without, Martine isn't criticizing me. I'm not criticizing him. We're open to each other. We're firm and sure about what we can do and can't do, and it's pretty clear. So that's one way to think of it as well. I enjoy
I,
these as well, Martine. Thank you.
I think to me, you just defined that whole concept of individuation, like how a
Yes,
person looks at it. Like I look at it this way. I look
yes,
at a relationship this way. I agree with everything you said. You
yes,
gave me another context to hold our relationship in. But
yes,
it's not as though that wasn't there. It was there. You defined it really powerfully. Like, wow, I like that. That's cool. I appreciate that. Like the respect we feel there's a degree of safety in what we say. You know, there's a degree of trust. All this stuff is in our relationship. Well, what do you want in a relationship with your significant other? Same thing. I want respect. I want trust. I want safety. I want to be able to have a conversation where I'm not triggered, and I say the same thing. I want to have a conversation where I am triggered, and then I can work through that.
yes, yes.
That's the thing. Because to think that I'm not going to get triggered, that's just crazy. It's not true. I'm going to get triggered. You've been married 35 years. Like, we get
Yes.
triggered. You know,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
how we deal with it, how we work through it. And you have somebody that's going to
Well,
help you
and
work through it.
she has a mother who's gone. She has a father who's gone. I had a mother who's gone. I have a father who's gone. We had grandparents and so on. There's a lot of complexity in human relationships that you are either attracted to looking at or you're not. But if you're a betting person, bet on the fact that the more curious you are about the complexities, the better off you're going to be. The less judgmental you are about your partner's complexity, the happier you're going to be.
Oh my God, that just reminds me of something. I was finished with this. Is it reminds me of a conversation I had with somebody that wanted to find out what I was doing. Like, what is it you do? Like in your men's groups, right? Let me post that, like my little men's group. Every other week, I do a men's group. It's online on Zoom, and you can register for it at freemansgroup.com. And I invite you to do that, and as well as if you have anything that you want to work on, to reach out to Dr. Frew, and I'll put his information it'll be all in the description, his how to contact him. It was a conversation where the gentleman was asking me about my men's group. So what do you do? And I was explaining to him, and he's like, I don't need that. And I'm like, that's awesome. And he started to share with me his relationship with his wife. And it was like, we go to the desert like 2 or 3 times a month. We'll drink a little bit, we laugh, we get along really, really great. We watch Netflix, and he started kind of penciling out his whole life. And I was like, that's cool. And he's like, what do you think about that? I go, that's really cool. I mean, if you're happy, I mean, that's all that matters, right? Like you're happy, like you're really clear about what you do and that you're happy, right? And like that's really cool. And I'm not built that way. Like I wouldn't be happy in that structure. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that structure. That structure is fabulous. I
Yeah,
wouldn't be happy in that structure. That's all.
right,
And
right.
so he's like, well, I am. And I said, oh, but he was being like, I was challenging him. And I said, okay, great, cool. So then the next men's group, he showed up, showed me, I just thought I'd check this thing out. Right. Thought I'd check this thing out. And I was like, that's cool. That's really great. And then as soon as we were leaving, he walks, can I talk to you? And I go, yeah. He goes, yeah, I'm getting a divorce now. It's like, like I'm getting divorced, like I thought everything was good 2 weeks ago and now I'm getting
Right,
divorced.
right,
But I'm not
right.
laughing at him. I'm just laughing at like how we're just so one-sided. We're just so
Sure.
one-sided as though that, that individuation, I love that. It's like, I look at that word and I keep saying I'm going to finish on this, but I love that word because how I look at that word, and I'm creating my own definition of that word, is my individuation, is my expression of myself and my expression of myself as it relates to those people around me as well.
It's all part of that. This is a
Yeah.
big conversation. I don't dare be tempted into going further because we're
that
done. But
that's
it's a
why we
big
keep coming back.
conversation. Okay, so individuation is one thing for you. The 7 primary needs of relationship is one thing we're going to revisit.
Yeah.
The whole area of how boundaries, bleeding boundaries, leads to consternation and depression, how that works and what that's about. These are future things that we want to talk to you about. We will talk to you about. But the one that Martine jumped over that we were going to do today is the conversation about sexual sensual intimacy. And that's on a lot of people that I know on their minds. And we need to get into that. Maybe next time we'll get into that one.
Let's do that next time. But how about we do it this way? Then I'm going to let you lead that conversation. I'll let you lead the conversation because you have a lot to say about that. And yeah, I'm just really interested in being a listener and then kind of like seeing how it lands with me. So yeah, let's do it that way.
Let's do it that way.
Awesome.
And if you're people that are listening, if you have questions about that, that would be a good time to email Martine or me and say, I'd like you to touch on this, or what about this? Kind of a Dear Abby approach.
Yeah,
Just write something, because we'll do better, Martine and I, if we know who's out there and what they're dealing with in this conversation. So it's not just two guys talking about what they want to talk about. It's what you need and what you want to talk about. That's where we're at.
absolutely. Thank you for that. That's really great. Thanks for being real crystal clear on that.
Yeah.
Again, as always, thank you for being here. Our goal is to do it around 25 minutes to 35 minutes. And then I just, just decided that, we're going to talk as long as we talk, and it's going to be great. And so like and share, share your friends, share with your friends, comment below, let us know if there's any topics you want to talk about
Yes. Yes.
and all that. And our goal is to show up here every other week live at 2:00 every other Tuesday, 2:00 Pacific time, and have a conversation somewhere between 25 minutes and 50 minutes.
Good. Absolutely.
Awesome.
God bless everybody.
We'll see you guys later.